Hey there, it's Chris Acton with Acton Creative, and this is A Handwoven Experience, episode 53. And this episode is titled 3 Cheers for the Guide String. Yay! So let's start at the top. What the heck is a guide string? How do I use it? Why is it important? So the guide string is important in between the planning your project and starting to measure your project. In between those two distinctive phases, that's where the guide string comes in. So come with me here. You've just planned your next brilliant project. You've done all the math, you know your numbers. You know the length of each warp yarn as it goes into the loom. You've figured all that up. So now you're like, okay, now I just have to wind all the warp yarns the same length in order. So how do you start to do that? By using your guide string. So let's back up for a moment. Let's say that your warp yarn, each warp yarn of your project is supposed to be, we'll say 100 inches as it goes into the loom. That's accommodated for all the things you need to think about to make sure that your project will end up the right length. When you come to the warping board, your guide string is going to need to be a little bit longer because you lose some inches as you wrap around the starter and the ending peg. So if you just took 100 inches and used that length as your guide string, you'd end up with a project that was shorter than that. So add some inches on for your guide string. I always like to say add 14 inches on for your guide string, just to make sure that when you cut all your warp yarns off, they'll be the right length going into the loom. So we've come to the warping board, we've measured off extra inches for our guide string. Now, here is where the real magic of the guide string comes in. You step up to your warping board, tie it around the starter peg, and then find your path. It sounds kind of deep and philosophical, doesn't it? But in this case, what we want to do is find a way that our yarn can go around the pegs that uses all of the length that we want for our project. So for this one in particular, I started here, I made my cross, I came back around, and I ended up at this peg over here. You do not have to end up at the end, because sometimes you have a short project and you don't have the length to go all the way down the board. End wherever. The key thing is to make sure it's all consistent. So wherever you start and end, just make sure all of your yarns follow the same path. So next, you step up with all your yarns, you follow the guide string down and back throughout the whole project. Here's what I recommend. Leave your guide string on the warping board after your project has been measured. Why? Because if you're having a bad day and a warp yarn breaks, you might need to measure other warp yarn. So for my money, it's not going to hurt anything. Leave the guide string on there. So just in case life goes south and you need to measure another warp yarn, you can just step up to your board, measure it with the guide string. It's still there. You have the right length. Go put it back in your loom and all is right with the world. For a guide string, you can use any kind of scrap yarn you have. As a matter of fact, it doesn't even have to be all one length. I have many times tied together little bits and blobs all together to make up the length of a guide string. So use whatever you have around to, you just want to make sure you've got the right length showing you the right path for all of your warp yarns. And that is the beauty of a guide string. It has very few responsibilities, but it does it really well. And it gives you peace of mind that when you get into your project, when you're dressing your loom and weaving your project, you have the right length because your guide string has been doing its job. So get out there, plan your next project, think about the lovely guide string, and enjoy. It's going to be a fabulous project. I just know it. All right, friends, have a great week and happy weaving.